Good morning, dear students. I'm a teacher at the Department of General Education, Aysara Kazı. The topic of today's lecture is Kazakhstan on the way to independence, stages of the formation of the idea of a national state. In today's lecture, we will consider a few questions. The first one is Kazakhstan at the beginning of the 20th century, the socio-political movement on the way of formation of a national state, Kazakhstan during the years of the First Russian Revolution from 1905 to 1907 years, Kazakhstan during the First World War, the February bourgeois democratic revolution in Russia and its influence on Kazakhstan. At the beginning of the 20th century, the main territory of Kazakhstan consisted of 6 regions: Trans-Caspian region, Turgay region, Semipalatinsk region, Sirdarya region, Semirechynsk region, Akmola region, and Ural region. At the beginning of the 20th century, there was a further increase in the population of Kazakhstan. For example, according to the data of all Russian census of 1897, 4.9 million people lived in the territory within the current borders, of which almost 82% were Kazakhs. By 1914, the total population of the region was 5.9 million people. 65% were Kazakhs. And the population growth of the region, among other sources, occurred mainly due to immigrants. And actually, there were 2 main reasons. The first one is sharply increased migration flows from the inner provinces of the Russian Empire, and the second reason is significant natural growth, especially among immigrants. The purposeful resettlement of the Russian-Ukrainian peasantry began in the early 17th of the 19th century, and it became widespread in the 18th. July 13, in 1889, the Tsarist government developed and approved a special regulation on the voluntary resettlement of rural inhabitants and Philistines to state lands. The development of capitalism in the agriculture of Kazakhstan adversely affects the nomadic cattle breeding of Kazakhs. The resettlement of peasants from central provinces to national suburbs gained a new scope. And after in the beginning of the 20th century, the main tasks of the First Russian Revolution was to resolve the agrarian question in the country. After the defeat of the revolution, Tsarism thought to resolve this issue through reforms, that is, while maintaining power and land in the hands of the landowners, to eliminate the causes of the crisis and agricultural relations. The aggravation of the agrarian issue in the Kazakhstan at the beginning of the 20th century reached its climax. In 1904, the provisional rules on the relocation of villagers and the bourgeois landowners were published, which had the force of law. According to the new rules, peasants were allowed to freely leave their former places of residence without the permission of government bodies, as prescribed at the regulation of 1889. Already in the late 19th century, land allotment parties were working in Kazakhstan, which were supposed to cut population plots on lands defined as free. Expedition Sherbina explored the steppe regions of Kazakhstan, and 18 million acres of land were identified for withdrawal. Despite the seemingly organized approach, the seizure of land in most cases went in the most rude and lawless manner, which was aggravated by the complex and confusing land relations in Kazakh society. Complicated land relations and the ownership of part of the land by the Cossack troops. Against the backdrop of complex land relations, Kazakhstan launched the Stolypin's Agrarian Reform, the aim of which was to strengthen the population movement. And the author of the reforms on the agrarian issue was the Minister of Agriculture of the Tsarist government, Stolypin, and he worked out the principles of modernization of the country to make the peasant the owner of the land. The massive resettlement of peasants from the central provinces of Russia to the territory of Kazakhstan led to the fact that huge fertile plots were transferred for use to peasants, and the Kazakhs were driven out to the desert regions of central and southern Kazakhstan. Some of the population leaving their ethnic homeland was forced to migrate to the borders of neighboring countries. For example, most of them went to China. At the beginning of 1913, the provisional rules on the leasing of governmental land in Siberia, the steppe territory, and Turkestan were approved to create large landowner farms. In Kazakhstan, landlord tyranny began to take shape. Military and civilian ranks, merchants received large tracts of Kazakh land for more than 30 years, the price of only 10-25 kopecks for thieves, became owners of large horse and sheep farms, under which the best pastures and land were located. The development of industry in Kazakhstan, especially small industrial enterprises and the railway network, accelerated the growth of cities. In the cities, the Kazakh population grew markedly. The growing stratification in the Kazakh village forced a part of the ruined population to go to the cities in search of work, significantly increasing the Kazakh population of Verny, Semipalatinsk, Petropavlovsk, Chimkent, and other cities. In the cities such as Irgiz, Kazakh made up 1/3 of the population. And now let's consider the types of industry in Kazakhstan at the beginning of the 20th century. For example, mining was developed in central and eastern Kazakhstan. Oil was developed in western Kazakhstan, and salt production also was developed in western and northeastern Kazakhstan. In the process of turning Kazakhstan into a source of raw materials for the capitalist industry of the central regions of the metropolis, as well as into a sales market, railways played an important role. For example, in 1894, the Siberian Railway was built, which crossed only some sections of the current territory of Kazakhstan. But in 1906, the first railway was built, crossing the territory of modern Kazakhstan, Orenburg, Tashkent. At the beginning of the 20th century, a new upsurge of the national liberation movement begins, going in two directions: traditionalist and pan-Islamist movement. Pan-Islamist movement associated with the Muslim movement of Central Asia. At the beginning of the 20th century, the Kazakh intelligence educated people, and the public mind is established as Okhagandar, educated. Its size and structure, the level of education and training were determined by the social system and living conditions. According to the incomplete data in the pre-revolutionary region, there were 3,000 teachers, 590 agricultural specialists, 244 doctors, 393 paramedics. At the beginning of the 20th century, there were many Kazakh intelligences, including writers, public figures such as Seralin, Khudayberdiev, Zhamabayev, Dulatov, Aymautov, Baitursunov, Bukikhanov, Toregharov. In the 19th century, among the Russian Muslims, among the Volga and Crimean Tatars, a socio-political and intellectual movement unfolded, which was called Jadism. They emphasized the dissemination of enlightenment, the development of Turkic languages and literature, the study of secular disciplines, the use of science, and the equal rights of women. The charitable activities of Muslims in the late of 19th, early 20th centuries was created, and these societies were created to solve pressing problems and facilitate the existence of the poor. And now let's consider the first Russian Revolution from 1905 to 1907 years. The first Russian Revolution is the event that took place from January 1905 to June 1907. The impetus for the beginning of the mass demonstrations and the political slogans was Bloody Sunday. Bloody Sunday is the imperial troops in St. Petersburg shot a peaceful demonstration of workers led by priest George Gapon on January 9 in 1905. From 1905 to 1907 years, during this period, the strike movement took on a particularly wide scope. Unrest and uprising occurred in the army and navy, which resulted in mass protests against the monarchy. In 1905, October Manifesto was approved. This manifesto consisted of two parts. The first one is granted civil liberties, speech, freedom, assembly unions, and the second one is approved by the parliament, consisting of the State Council and the State Duma. At the end of 1905, a congress was held in Uralsk and setting the task of creating Kazakh National Political Party. In 1907, the first and second Duma was organized, and Kazakh writers, Kazakh intelligences participated in this Duma, and the structure of first and second Duma were elected and deputies from all Kazakh regions. At the meeting of the second State Duma on May 16, Karatayev made a report on the impact of resettlement on the Kazakh economy. At the beginning of the 20th century, there were two main newspapers. The first one is Aykhab newspaper, the second one is Kazakh newspaper. Kazakhstan during the first uprising of 1916 in Kazakhstan. On July 19, in 1914, Russia entered First World War, and to support the front, economic measures began to be taken. Requisition of livestock and further tax increases, especially military tax was introduced, and in addition to direct and indirect taxes, various donations were collected, for which livestock and yurts were collected from the Kazakhs. In 1916, June 25, a decree of the Tsar on the mobilization of foreigners of Central Asia and Kazakhstan and a number of other areas for the construction of defensive structures and military communications in the area of the army was issued. The able-bodied male population aged from 19 to 24 years was subject to requirement. This decree was to occasion for the start of the National Liberation Uprising of 1916 in Kazakhstan and Central Asia. The main centers of this uprising, they were Torgay, Semirechynsk, and Shu-Talas. At the beginning of 1917, Russia came to close to a new revolution. The country has developed a revolutionary situation. On February 14, at the call of the Bolsheviks, 60 enterprises went on strike in St. Petersburg. On February 25, the strike became universal. On February 27, in 1917, Tsarist officials were arrested, the Tsar was overthrown, the bourgeois democratic revolution defeated Russia. After this revolution, two dual power was created. The first one is a provisional government, defended the interests of the bourgeois. The second one is councils of soldiers, workers, peasant deputies. Kazakhstan had its own specifics, and there was even a trio power. The third power became Kazakh national committees. And there was many parties on the territory of Kazakhstan during this revolution. The first one is Alash, the main party. The chairman of this party was Bukikhanov. The second one is Ishus party. The chairman was Tugusov. The third is Shura Islami party. The chairman of this party was Abdurashid Khanov. In 1917, in Orenburg, the first All-Kazakh Congress was organized, and the program of the party Alash was approved. And this program consisted of main 10 points. They include state structure, local freedom, fundamental rights of citizens, religion, the court, science and education, problems of developing a land law. In 1917 at Edinburgh, the Second Congress was organized. And during this Congress, main problems were discussed and many decisions were approved. For example, the issues of the formation of territorial national autonomy. Kazakh-Kyrgyz region was called Talash. The constitution was to be approved by the All-Russian Constituent Assembly. It was proposed to elect the Provisional People's Councils Alashodda of 25 people, of which 10 were assigned to representatives of non-indigenous nationality. And the government of Alashodda, headed by Bukikhanov, was located in Semipalatinsk. So our lecture is over. Thank you for your attention.